All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Jinhua Zhao, a professor of cities and transportation at MIT. Welcome to the MIT Mobility Forum, organized by the MIT Mobility Initiative. Today, we have a very exciting topic on the retraining for the electric vehicle age. I'm really glad to have Kiana Scott from Charter Health, Rajiv from EV Masterclass, and Sunil Nail from New York MTA joining us. Right. Throughout the 95 session we have run in the past 3 years, we have talked a lot about the decarbonization in general, and also then specifically on electrification of our mobility system. We have covered topics like battery, hydrogen, policy, charging network, etc. But one topic we have not discussed is the labor force and the retraining in general, right? So I'm really glad that today, the panel today, along with Bo and John, will really discuss this topic in depth, right? But I do want to show people a little bit about the prior topic that we already discussed in decarbonization field. So let me share the screen. So this is also a demonstration how you can use the website to explore the different topics, right? If you go to mmi.mit.edu/forum, you'll see all the topics there. But for today, for example, if you're interested in decarbonization, you go down here, you look at the decarbonization, then we'll pop up all the different topics. As I mentioned that we have talked about the fuel cell, we talked about the policy discussion, entrepreneurship in electrification, hard decarbonization sectors, business aspect of EV sector, charging network design, EV policy from Dan Spurling, battery design by Don Satterway, Gil Pratt from the Toyota perspective, the Steve Barrett about towards zero impact aviation, from the city perspective on zero carbon. Bill Green talked about the hard decarbonization sector from transportation, and also Jessica Transit talked about the mobility service sector. So you can see that there's a variety of topics already covered in decarbonization, right? But the labor force is not a major factor, major pillar that will enable all this transition, right? So without further ado, I'll pass the forum to Buwan to have the discussion on retraining EV area. Buwan, please.
Thank you, Jinhua, and thank you everyone for joining. As Jinhua was mentioning and highlighting, the transportation sector across the globe in most countries is either the first or the second largest sector in terms of carbon emissions. And there is an urgent need, to decarbonize the sector using new technologies. Change will be driven, of course, by policy, which drives manufacturers to change their, types of vehicles, and also by consumer choice. And change can range from shifting to less polluting vehicles. You move from an ICE to an EV to a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid. Electrifying transit and rail, would shift to e-bikes, to name a few. I mean, there are many, and we have many of forum episodes which focus on that. However, these technologies differ vastly from what is in use right now. EV drivetrains, as an example, an EV drivetrain are worlds apart from what an ICE car uses. And for the ICE drivetrain, we have a century of supply chain and trained professionals supporting it, which we don't for the EV drivetrain right now. So there is this huge labor gap. There is also an increasing relevance of software in basically everything, but also more specifically in cars, because it moves, everything is connected. And this is no longer a single domain. What I mean by that is it's not just electrical engineering, it's not just mechanical engineering, and it's not just even civil engineering. You need to know software. There needs to be a certain level of software know-how to be able to fix and build basic systems and components. And one great example is the EV charger. You would assume that an electrical engineer, person with an electrical engineering background, is best suited to fix it. But no, they need to have a basic amount of software, know how to, how do the handshakes work? Where could a potential point of failure be? Is the cable too tight? I mean, is that an electrical engineering question, or is that like a civil question? The tension on the cable, right? Because that's more of a bridge problem. So anyway, so while there is a lot of coverage on how the EV transition will take away jobs, we're seeing this daily in the media, like, ICE car has 40,000 parts, in EV has, 5,000 or 8,000 parts. So, so many lesser jobs. One of my proposals for this discussion is, can we frame this question in a better way and say that how can we retrain our workforce to ensure that this transition is a success and does not falter? and in this process create more jobs and not take away jobs. So, excuse me, this transition is not an easy one. We have 1 billion IC vehicles on the road right now, and it'll take a village and much more to get all this shifted to much cleaner technologies. So non-availability of the relevant talent pool is probably becoming the biggest impediment in this transition right now. So across manufacturing, EV architecture, design, engineering, selling, service and maintenance, sales and supports of electric vehicles, e-bikes as well. Genoa's e-bike currently is out of order because there's nobody who can fix it. He bought this e-bike 3 years ago.
Right.
It got spoiled, and now nobody can fix it. He's actually asking me to take a look, but that's for later. So yeah, new roles are critical, and we need to discuss strategies to bridge the skills gap, and hence this panel that brings together entrepreneurs and executives from across the globe who are pioneering this space by offering such training opportunities to ensure that we have a global workforce ready for the EV era. So let me quickly introduce my panelists, and we'll jump into 30 minutes of quick discussion and move on to audience Q&A after that. So in no particular order, I'll probably start with Sunil, who's first on my screen. So Sunil Nair is the Vice President for the Zero Emission Fleet Transformation Program at the New York City MTA, Metropolitan Transportation Authority. He has over 18 years of public transit experience, and in his current role, he starts with developing and implementing a robust deployment strategy to facilitate the transition to a zero emissions fleet for the MTA by 2040. And this includes a purchase plan for 500 battery electric buses and implementing the required significant charging infrastructure upgrade as part of the project, coming to close to around $1.1 billion. He's interesting point. He's worked at the Indian Space Research Organization before this, so a very cool point. And he has a mechanical engineering degree from the National Institute of Technology in Calicut and a master's degree in engineering science and mechanics from the Penn State University. My next panelist, Kiana. Kiana has a BA in sociology and a master's in education from the California State University. She has over 20 years of experience managing education programs and building various curriculum for students. She is currently learning SVP, head of learning and development at Charger Help. Charger Help, for those of you aren't aware of it, is doing amazing work fixing broken chargers across the US and training technicians to be able to fix chargers correctly and in the right way. More on that later. I'll just introduce my last panelist before we move on. So Rajiv Vaisar is an automotive engineer from IIT Madras, and he has an experience of 12 years working in the automotive industry across companies such as Bosch, Indian companies such as TVS, Mahindra, and Mahindra across India and Germany. Interestingly, you worked with IKEA in the mail deliveries through electric vehicles as well in 2018. And he works with various policy think tanks in India, such as Niti Aayog, Rocky Mountain Institute in the US, in their urban mobility labs, and with EV policy making of various state and federal governments. That being said, let us get into the panel discussion. I'd like to start with Kiana. And my question, I think folks in the US have been seeing articles regarding the poor public charging reliability. 1 in 4 chargers, 1 in 3 chargers. The Wall Street Journal did a recent article, I think a few months ago, and I think 40% of the chargers in LA were not working when the person was visiting chargers. So this is creating hindrance because people are reading this and there's negativity in the air and they're pushing off EV purchases, and this needs to be fixed like immediately and ASAP. So when Charger Help was started, and what were the key shortcomings that y'all encountered when trying to fix this and hiring technicians, and then figuring out, hey, these people, the electricians have a skill gap of software. The software guys have a skill gap of figuring out what transformers blown or what capacitors given way. So what additional skills did the technicians need to be armed with, and how did you solve the problem there? And also, how are you formalizing this into so that you don't have to custom train each hire on what skill is missing for them?
Absolutely. 3 questions. I'm going to try to answer all of them. The first one is kind of obvious, and you stated it in the precursor to the discussion. I think the biggest shortcoming that we faced was that there was no labor force. There were no identified people to perform operations and maintenance on charging stations. I think as a country, and maybe even as a world, we saw the manufacturing of charging stations, the deployment, the installation, but nothing on the other side for when they fail. And charging stations they're IoT assets, so they will become inoperable. They will need a software upgrade, a firmware download. They will need just to be maintained. And so with no labor force to do that, charging stations are down and they stay down. So that was the solve for Charger Help. I think one of the things that we have learned, and this is also something that you mentioned, so grateful for this conversation, is that I think the new field service workspace just in general will be one that is married to software and technology. And that is, of course, EVSE or even charging stations, but just in general, as we move towards an energy transition and just a technological revolution as a whole, your regular boots on the ground, hands on an asset job will involve software. Or the automotive industry now, it will have software. So I think that is one of the biggest discoveries that we've made. And I think lastly, when we talk about training people and just the energy transition as a whole, it will not just rest with, as you mentioned, engineers or electricians. There's a shortage of those folks anyway. So I think as we talk about the urgency around climate correction and reducing carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, fossil fuel emissions, we are going to have to reimagine what that workforce looks like. We're going to have to look at different ways that we can honor various intelligences and different work experiences and see where we can upskill and retrain people to also be a part of this energy transition. So as we see an urgency, as we see a shortage in what is traditionally the skilled role in that space, like I said, electricians and engineers, what are some other adjacent roles? Are there folks that are in warehouse industries? Are there folks that have traditionally worked in oil and gas? Are there folks that have worked in other field service roles like cable? Are there some adjacent skills and familiar knowledge and expertise that they already have that we can anchor ourselves in and then transition them and upskill them to be a very impactful, productive, effective workforce in the EVSE infrastructure and other just energy transition roles as a whole.
Yeah, I think a couple of great points. The points on retraining engineers is one that I would like to dig in a little more, and I'll move to Rajiv for this one. So if the folks on the call who are not keenly aware of the Indian demographics, so India is obviously the country with the largest population, 1.4 billion, overtook China recently, and 65% of that 1.4 billion is below the age of 35, and India churns out 1.5 million engineering graduates every year. That is not a typo. I have not misspoke. It is 1.5 million engineering graduates we produce every year. And the bitter truth is a lot of these graduates do not get jobs because there are simply not those many jobs. And some of these graduates maybe are not armed with the right skills. So looking at you, Rajiv, I'm sure this was part of your motivation for starting your EV Masterclass. But what was the other gap that you saw in the market? And how do you think this will enable the blossoming of the EV ecosystem in India, along with providing more credible job opportunities for these youngsters who are, graduating, getting engineering degrees, but unable to find relevant jobs and might have to just join, do at a call center or something else, which is not really, paying, it's not relevant to their engineering degree.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Bhuvan, and thank you very much, for having me on this panel. Bhuvan, what you made is a perfect statement. Let me draw parallels to few revolutions that we have seen in the past, and then I will answer these questions and reflect upon the points that we discussed. So during 1980s, when the IT revolution was taking shape, And there was such a transition from in every sector, be it the manufacturing sector, service sector, education sector, health, such a huge transition, too much of work, few hands working upon it. And then India came to the rescue, right? I mean, if you see in the 1980s, I'm sure Mr. Sunil probably would agree, if not of 80s, but probably early 2000s of Mr. Sunil, right? Lot many engineers, lot of talent from the IT perspective started contributing, and you see the Indian talent not just I would say nudging the Indian IT revolution, but also helping the entire world. And even now, India is still called as the IT capital of the world, right? Now, fast forward, when we look at the e-commerce revolution, that's what we see with the kind of digital penetration that's happening in India. India has got the highest penetration of e-commerce deliveries and usage, right? When you look at the entire world. Now, in a context like this, when electric mobility is being, I would say, considered as a revolution across the world, the same thing is going to repeat. Because, see, earlier, if you look at, especially, let me talk from the Indian context, right? You have your ICE vehicles, your regular vehicles, there is some problem on the road, and then you take the vehicle to any mechanic shop, a repair shop, and then they fix it, right? But then electric vehicles are smart. They can speak, they can express their discomfort, they can say where their problem is. And then the person who, I would say, diagnoses them must be able to understand that particular language, must be able to diagnose it correctly, and must be able to, it is almost like an automotive doctor, right? He should be able to diagnose and he should be able to prescribe. Unfortunately, the existing youth or the existing, I would say, talent is not rightly equipped for such kind of a demand that the industry is going to happen. Let me also share my own experience of why I started EV Masterclass. So, in the year 2018, when IKEA just came to India, it started its operations in Hyderabad. I was at the time leading the strategy for a company called Gati Logistics, which is like the Indian UPS or the Indian DHL, correct? So, by the contractual obligation, Gati has a contractual obligation that 25% of their mobilities or deliveries are to happen through electric vehicles. And by 2030, the 25% must come towards 100. And in 2018, EVs are not heard of. Even if they were heard of, they were considered to be minority. Even now they are minority, but hardly spoken about. And then Gati as a company was expected to make deliveries, right, of furniture and such kind of products through electric vehicles, right? Which is almost next to impossible, right? So that was when we started procuring the vehicles that are available in the market. We started working with companies such as Mahindra. We started working with local startups which are developing electric three-wheelers and started deploying them. But interestingly, if at all we were to hire people to service, we were getting none. If at all we were to hire people to manage their operations, we were getting none. And then later on, I moved to another company called Ito Motors, which is an electric three-wheeler manufacturing company. It's exactly the same thing there. Power electronics engineers into automotive, very limited. Embedded firmware engineers into automotive, very limited. Design engineers, BMS engineers, absolutely scarce, right? So that was when I realized that there is fundamentally something wrong. When not just the Indian government, but when the entire world is inching towards sustainable mobility and green mobility, and a 1.4 billion nation is not meeting the needs of that particular demanding market, then there is something wrong. And when I kind of resonated this idea with my friends, such as the founder CEO of Ether, Tarun Mehta. Ether is one of the largest two-wheeler manufacturing company. And then with Sulajja Firodia, Kinetic Green, they recently launched a spectacular product called E-Luna, right? And many other, I would say, industry leaders, they exactly resonated the same. Rajiv, you're hitting the bullseye. We are not getting the right talent to build world-class products. So that was when we started EV Masterclass, more to do with equip the Indian youth, because the opportunity is huge, not just in the domestic market, but in the US market, in the European market, in the Southeast Asian markets, right? The opportunity is huge. The number of hands working on that engine are very, very less. If not for India, who can leverage that particular opportunity? So that's how EV Masterclass was born. And we started our first journey by collaborating with the world's largest incubator called T-Hub. Some of you would have heard it. It is based out of Hyderabad. And then later with the government of Andhra Pradesh, and then with the government of India. And now we are nurturing talent, right, among the blue collar workforce, focusing upon electric two-wheelers and three-wheeler service technicians, And among right, the graduates and the postgraduates working upon autonomous driving, working upon homologation, working upon building the smart BMS for the batteries and everything. Right. I think this is the time, not just for India to grow and grow only for Indian market, but this is the time the entire world looks at this youngest nation and this most talented nation to meet the needs of demanding EV market. And here we are saying that, hey, yeah, we are ready and we are ready to take this plunge. Thank you very much, Bhuvan.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm going to come back to you, Rajiv, but on the note that you mentioned of the problems you faced in 2018, Sunil, I'm going to turn that to you. So now that you're implementing, getting 500 e-buses into the MTA fleet, and this is already while facing, the impending fiscal cliff, though I understand New York MTA is in a much better position than other public transit agencies in the US. The maintenance, the operations, the bus scheduling for e-buses, everything is different compared to traditional busing. Even the drivers need to be retrained, try to maximize regen braking, don't keep riding the brakes. And also the other challenge of, there's also the availability and the lack of credible options in the US market. So how does for a behemoth like MTA, how does the EV transition play out? And what is the biggest challenge from the manpower perspective, especially given that you need to have your buses running each day, every trip, and there's a huge penalty if you don't. So
sure. Thank you, Bhuvan, and it's really nice to see you, Kiana and Rajiv, and thank you, Joao, Dr. Joao. Let me just give you a tiny introduction to the MTA itself before I start off on the challenges itself. We have the MTA itself is composed of 5 kind of operating arms. We have what's called bridges and tunnels that operate the bridges and tunnels in New York City. 2 commuter railroads that operate trains right from New York City all the way to Long Island and parts of Connecticut. And then, of course, New York City Transit that looks at the subway services of the city and the bus services in the city. And then, of course, the capital construction arm that looks at major capital construction projects across all these individual operating agencies, right? Buses itself, we have 5,800 buses in our fleet. We carry approximately 2.2 million customers on a daily basis, paid and unpaid. And we have 28 depot locations across the city, across all 5 boroughs. We have an operating budget of approximately $3.5 billion annually and a capital budget of about the same, $3.6 billion thereabouts. And back in 2017, we made a public commitment that we would convert all of our buses, not just buses, all of our paratransit vehicles. We have about 1,400 paratransit vehicles, and we have about 1,800 non-revenue vehicles to a zero emission spaces by 2040. So that itself was a fairly large challenge, not to talk about the challenges inherent in the EV market itself. So what we started off was we started with a small pilot, worked with 2 major manufacturers across the United States, Proterra Bus and New Flyer, got their buses on property and started to understand the space. Now, we've been running a ICE / internal combustion engine / hybrid electric bus fleet for the longest time. And the transition itself was not smooth, and there was a lot of learning that happened between the agencies and bus manufacturers. But we've come a long way. We had those vehicles for approximately 5 years. The vehicles were on a leased basis, and I want to say the learnings were twofold. One is we right away realized that standards need to be tightened between charger manufacturers and bus manufacturers, because you can talk to bus manufacturers and they would assure you that your bus is going to pull up under a particular charger, and as long as the charger and the bus adhere to the same standards, your bus is going to charge. That was far from the case. Even if SAE standards were published and certified, there were always open kind of loopholes in the standards that allowed for bus manufacturers to carry on with their designs and charger manufacturers to carry on with their designs, resulting in fairly large transit agencies like us to work through those kinks that allowed for buses and chargers to talk to each other. So that was the first big lesson that we learned. The second big lesson is New York tends to be a colder city, and the range of electric buses in colder cities tend to be really a probabilistic problem. And when we did some metrics, what we realized is when the temperature changes from approximately 60 degrees to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, I'm sorry, I'm using Fahrenheit, 60 degrees to 20 degrees, your bus range almost reduces by 50%. And that's a fairly large issue, especially when it comes to a class of bus called articulated buses, which is 60-foot buses. We realized that approximately 45% of our articulated bus fleet schedules can only be completed using the current technology. Yeah. We ran some simulations. We accounted for battery improvements, efficiency improvements, battery chemistry changes. We ran some simulations with respect to battery size changes, and we realized that for standard buses as well as express buses, standard buses are standard 40-foot buses, express buses are 45-foot buses, we can potentially get to all of our scheduled trips and runs by 2040 with all the technology improvements. But even then, given a cold city like New York, we foresee that only 65% of our schedules, articulated bus schedules, can actually run using even advancements in technology. So this itself is a fairly clear and present problem with respect to where we are going. So we had the leased fleet. We have buses on property now. We are getting 60 buses over the course of this year. We're getting another 200 buses over the course of 2025 and 2026. We're getting another 300 buses in 2027, right? But the biggest issue that's facing a lot of American public transit agencies is the shortage of qualified bus OEMs across the United States. Recently, we had Nova essentially shutting down operations in North America, which means that for capitally funded projects under the FTA, it becomes almost impossible to buy buses on FTA funds from Nova. So Nova's out of bounds. Proterra folded up shop recently, which means that Proterra is not a qualified bus manufacturer. They don't even manufacture buses anymore in the United States. We recently had news that Eldorado actually closed up shop. These are large bus manufacturers essentially closing up shop, which means that the qualified vendor pool that we want to get to is shrinking, right? And right now, we just have one qualified bus manufacturer who are structurally qualified to run on New York City roads. So another big challenge that we are facing is how do we effectively expand that pool of qualified bus manufacturers, yet use the monies that we can get from the federal government to purchase these buses? I mean, there are other bus manufacturers out in Europe and India and China and all that, right? But there are certain FTA considerations, constraints, and we just need to work through those constraints. So these are some of our key kind of challenges. Workforce training, I don't know if it's a challenge. More so, I consider that to be an opportunity for the organization, right? We have approximately 12,000 operators, bus operators on the workforce, about 2,500 maintainers, 2,300 bus maintainers, and about 300 facility maintainers on our workforce. I consider the transition from ICE to EV to be more of a chance for our workforce to upskill themselves, to make sure that they are on par with the latest in technology, because your electric buses, it's not just mechanical engineering, it's a combination of mechanical, electrical, electronics, and for lack of a better word, I think it's mechatronics that's actually happening out there in the field. And I think it's a great opportunity for our mechanics and maintainers to actually upskill themselves. So I would not consider that to be an issue, but definitely something that we have to work on. There are other challenges, but I think these are some of the main ones that I wanted to convey back to this panel. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that lovely overview. And you're really on the money with your numbers there, I think, with the MTA. So so you mentioned standards and you mentioned retraining, and you also mentioned SAE. So I'm looking at you, Kiana. Y'all recently launched a program in partnership with the SAE called the EVSE Technician Program. And your first cohort of graduates, I think they graduated 2 days ago. So can you tell us a little more about this program? I guess it's a way of formalizing this training.
Absolutely.
Who is the target audience? What is the end result expected to be? And where do the graduates then go and work? So just a little bit about this program and your first batch. And congratulations.
Thank you. The first cohort graduated earlier this month, February 2nd, with through our partnership with Michigan Central and Detroit at Work. So super excited about that. Today is also the last day of our first training cohort with our partnership with Goodwill, and specifically the site in Goodwill, North Georgia. So super grateful, and things are happening. Our partnership with SAE started about last year, and it was a nice undertaking. We had about 8 months of some hard, arduous, tedious work. Really important. We got some SMEs in the space, some electricians, some engineers, some OEMs, some SMEs from our company, and it was basically a collaboration of folks in the field. And they looked at our original training modules, which let me just say a little bit about that. So when we got into this training space, Charger Hub started with 5 modules. And SAE took our modules, adopted and adapted them, and transitioned them into 7 domains. 5 modules still now transitioned to domains still remain. The 2 that they added on the front end were electrical energy fundamentals and electrical safety and codes. But that collaborative effort lasted about 8 or 9 months, and when it was done, SAE created the what we now have, the body of knowledge for the EVSE technician career, if you will. Soon to be released this year, I want to say Q2, will be the exam that folks, when they go through the training, will have to take to now become certified EVSE technicians under SAE to have a career in this space. I think what's really important about that partnership with SAE, one, is being backed and supported by SAE is really great. They're standard in this automotive space. 2, I think there was a lot of distrust, if you will, a lot of hey, is this a gig job? This is not really real. It's here today, gone tomorrow. It's trending. And I think as we really push towards mass EV adoption, we're going to have a reliable infrastructure to support those EVs, to put confidence back in the EV driver. So we're going to have a trained, skilled workforce, to make sure that the charging stations are working. So SAE coming in and standardizing that space, producing a body of knowledge to make sure that folks have the skill and the knowledge that they need is, I think, just really helpful as we move towards mass EV adoption. When we talk about who is this training for, I'd say it's for everybody. We've had electricians go through the training. We've had high school students go through the training. We've had folks that are transitioning from service sector roles, and folks that are coming from, like I said, warehousing jobs before. I think as people just keep a pulse on where we're going in the automotive space, they see the plethora of opportunities that are opening up. I think it would behoove people to at least be near and dear to it when we talk about the career opportunities that are going to come forth out of this space. But Charger Help specifically, the folks that we have trained have been largely connected to workforce development organizations. It's been no secret the federal government has released a ton of money, particularly through the IRA, ton of money towards EV mobility, mass EV adoption, the infrastructure, and a lot of workforce organizations have been recipients of those funds and have said, hey, we want to train people. I think we talked about earlier, this space is going to be largely connected to the technological revolution that's happening. And when we talk about technology, period, tech companies, period, diversity in terms of folks of color and women has been something that has been lacking. We haven't done our best in those spaces. So I think when we talk about the Justice 40 program, and just really being intentional and deliberate about targeting and identifying people in those communities, we've been grateful and honored to work with folks who have held that at the helm of their programming and an organization when we talk about training in this space. So when we talk about the jobs that are available for us, our training to hire pipeline doesn't work the way that people think. Like you train and then you hire. Again, we're sitting in the space of adoption, so it's not yet there, but we are creating, we are installing, we are deploying, and we're still, in a sense, getting the infrastructure together. We all know that. So we're still getting assets under management. We're still getting, if you will, customers. So when we train people, depending on the assets that we have under management or the potential business there, that pretty much lead to the pool of candidates that we can begin to source and hire. But I want to say one of the things. I want to talk about one of the things we talk about training in this space. Granted, SAE has done a great job of standardizing the skills and the knowledge that people need. It'll be a baseline foundational training that people will benefit from as they transition to EVSE operations and maintenance technicians. But the second half of that is the manufacturer training, the OEMs. And one of my goals at Charger Hub, I just really trying to figure out how this can happen, but it's to make the space more agnostic. We have just different manufacturers that have different requirements. They have different ways that they train, different timelines, different number of folks that can be allowed. And as we move tons of people to this space, it can become a bottleneck and a holdup. And it won't be because people won't have the skill set. It won't be because people are not willing. It won't be because people don't have the tools. It will be because they weren't next in line for the training, or the OEM that only will train 20 people a year, yet they have 20,000 charging stations out here. So we got to figure out a way to like really streamline that space so that we can get folks quicker and faster as they become available in the space.
Yeah, amen to that. So on the topic of training for EVSEs and the modules that you mentioned. So Rajiv, at EV Masterclass, is there a big focus on the EVSE, the charger reliability from the Indian perspective, or are you working more with OEMs and governments, and partnering with them for training the workforce to work at the factories manufacturing the EVs? So just
Yeah, great. First of all, congratulations, Kiana, on the recent cohort graduation, and fantastic job. In fact, when I was at MIT, Bhuvan spoke very high about the organization and then the activities your company is doing. Keep doing, and kudos. So, Bhuvan, coming to answer your question, right? Every component of electric vehicles is a gold mine of opportunities, right? So we focus on everything, be it the component design and manufacturing. That is when we talk about, say, for example, the motors, the traction motors, the power electronics that are involved into it, be it the heart of the EVs, that is battery, right? Because a lot of R&D is happening in the batteries, because people are now talking between LFP, people are talking it with LTO batteries. Now people are talking about solid state batteries, and they're talking about zinc air batteries. Oh man, a lot of research is happening among the batteries. And at the same time, a lot of innovation is being brought into the manufacturing of batteries, right? Earlier, we are talking about spot welding. Now we are talking about wire bound welding, right? Even more. And then so far, we haven't seen liquid cooling systems, active liquid cooling systems in the three-wheeler batteries. But right now, India is the first company to build in liquid cooling, active liquid cooling systems, and then the BMS into a three-wheeler, right? Those are only available in the high-end vehicles, right? So three-wheelers, batteries, and then the motors, and of course, the charging infrastructure, right? For example, India is at this point of time is the only market which has products such as 100% charge in 15 minutes, right? Imagine this 100% charge in 15 minutes at a speed of 4C. This is again, we are not talking about high-end cars. We are talking about electric three-wheelers, right? The cargo vehicles where the whole India moves its deliveries on, right? So in that context, there is absolutely a lot of focus on every aspect of EVs, more so on the charging infrastructure, the batteries, and then the battery designs, the components such as motors. And interestingly, even the manufacturing to a certain extent is completely revolutionized when it comes to EVs. It is no longer a simple conveyor belt assembly, right? It is more an electronic item assembly. For example, in the earlier era, for you to set up an automobile plant, you need hundreds of acres of land. But then right now, if you see the market in India, you can assemble an electric three-wheeler or a four-wheeler probably in a 2,000, 3,000 square feet building, because Every component is right by itself, and all you need to do is bring them together, right? So in a context like this, the manufacturing barriers have come down, the need for huge infrastructure has come down, which means the demand for skilled talent in putting these things together has really increased. So yes, we are focusing on the EVSE, the charging, the supply network. We are focusing on the battery pack assembly. In fact, EV Masterclass is working with the country's largest EV battery manufacturer called Amara Raja. That's again based out of Hyderabad, right? They have been the leading players for lead acid batteries, and now they're building the lithium ion batteries with a $2 billion investment in Hyderabad. We are again working with them in curating talent to assemble those batteries, and of course on the automotive manufacturing, and most importantly the service technicians, right? So these are the focus areas, Bhuvan. And again, the talent is being groomed not just for Indian domestic markets. We are already in talks with some companies in Southeast Asian markets. We have opened our office, EV Masterclass office in Dallas, Texas. Right? We are knocking the doors of Tesla and Toyota and saying, hey, you know what? The talent from India is knocking at your door. Why don't we work together? Right? So we have opened the office in Texas, Dallas. And so that's where we are building from India to the world, especially from the talent perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajiv. So talking of partnerships with between companies and retraining organizations, Sunil, any plans at the MTA for partnering with organizations for retraining your workforce, or your schedulers, drivers, maintenance staff? Though I assume the maintenance staff will be trained by your bus OEM who provides the buses. So any thoughts on that?
Right. So great question. Right now, what we do is it's purely a train the trainer type approach, where the bus OEM actually trains one or a cohort of our staff in-house, and then that particular staff goes ahead, uses the training school to actually build out the training program and actually bring in operators, bring in maintainers, bring in charger technicians, and get them trained on the material, on the hardware, and on the software, right? That said, what we are planning, and we're working with the federal government on next steps. What we are planning is just in the same way that the federal government built out multiple hydrogen hubs across the country. Very recently, they announced the creation of 7 hydrogen hubs across the country that serve as regional hubs. What we want to do is develop a regional training hub for electric vehicles, charging infrastructure, as well as electrical distribution, training, certification / vocational programs, close or in the New York City area, affiliated with the MTA. That's what we want to do. We've called it the MTA Zero Emissions Center of Excellence, and that's what we've put out to the FTA. But that's still in the works. And what we want to do is really attract talent from around the region, where they can come to this central point, get retrained, get certified as necessary, maintain the connections, and develop the community of EV technicians, maintainers, operators, and things like that. So that's our thoughts right now. We haven't built out anything. I mean, given that our fleet is pretty small right now, but we have a long ways to go, and this is a program that's going to grow. So that's our strategy.
Thank you. We're going to move on to audience questions. In case you haven't noticed, the chat is always hyperactive in these forums. Before we do that, I'd also like to just call on David Machols, who is the Dean of Automotive Transportation Programs at the Suffolk County Community College. Hi, Dave. Thanks for joining.
Hi.
Yeah. So, I mean, community colleges are a great, bed for, retraining and reskilling of people. And you've had a lot of partnerships with OEMs such as General Motors and Tesla as well. So could you very shortly tell us how y'all are working in enabling this transition, a 1-minute overview? Thanks.
Certainly. Yeah. So we work with 9 different OEMs at Suffolk County Community College out here on Long Island. And EV is still very novel. Toyota's been one of our longstanding partners, and for 25 years they've had hybrid electric vehicles, but it's still very new. And I think what's of interest probably to this group is that many schools are still trying to figure out what do we teach, how do we teach it, and how do we integrate these curricula, much as Kiana was alluding to, and also Rajiv earlier. So one of the things that I've done also is I've started a private company called Advanced Vehicle Technology Group to provide technical training. It started here throughout the Northeast of the United States in partnership with some of the Clean Cities organizations. And we're offering training for fleets, municipalities, train the trainer programs for educators, and that's sort of an outreach of this burgeoning need that we saw here at Suffolk.
Thanks so much, Dave. Let's move to the audience questions. John, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Dave pointed out a very interesting comment in the chat, which was that currently just about 0.4% of automotive technicians hold a type of EV certification. So there's clearly a long way to go in that training and skilling process. There is, as Bhuvan mentioned, a very active conversation in the chat, and we'll share the file with all of you because there's a lot of interesting comments to extract from it. But there was this may be more for you, Kiana. There was quite a conversation about sort of Tesla versus non-Tesla charging infrastructure. Why does one work? Why doesn't the other work? The adoption of the North American charging standard. And I just wonder, do you have anything further to kind of elaborate on that stream from the charger help perspective?
I'm going to say something that's probably silly, but probably true. So Tesla is Tesla. A lot of these other OEMs are emerging. Tesla has been in this space a long time. And I think I say this a lot. Elon did a number when he sold up a lot of land, installed a lot of charging stations. He has a lot of technology, a lot of staff. They've been testing in this space. They've had one of the first to have a EV charger. The electric vehicle just in the space. So I think they've had a lot of time, a lot of capacity, a lot of access to technology, a lot of brains. So they've had a lot of time to perfect what they're doing. We have folks that are emerging in the space, and they didn't have the runway that Tesla did. So I just think they did ready, set, go before a lot of folks did. I think when we talk about the folks basically buying into their system, it's great. You have to get your adapter and it'll happen. I think that'll increase the uptime with this 97% through the NEVI bill. But I think for folks that are not doing that, we will still need to, again, have those charging stations, all of them operational. Tesla's, their stations do stay up more, but again, they're Tesla. But when we talk about just training folks as a whole, providing a curriculum, a training experience, access to the space as a whole, to Dave's point earlier, there are a lot of things that we need to solve for right now. He himself said, I started my own company because we're still trying to figure it out. We ourselves are also working with community colleges because people see the gaps. I don't want to say the marriage, but I don't want to say the departure, but the move, the evolution of the automotive industry as a whole is going to be electric. We're getting there, and we're going to have to make a bridge between the two.
Yeah, the Tesla example does seem to be the sort of ultimate testament to, the power of vertical integration when the company that makes the cars is the company that builds the charging equipment and the company that's operating effectively the charging equipment. Whereas, when you have three different stakeholders playing that role, obviously those handshakes and all of those data exchanges become more complex and more prone to error. So it seems like hopefully with time we move in that direction now with a standardization and consistency of handshakes so that 10 years from now we're not having this conversation.
No, for sure. I want to just offer this really quickly because you bring up a good point. One of the biggest things that Charger Hub is really interested in, I think what helps us as we learn about charging stations is aggregating a ton of data. Charging stations have, I don't know, 8 or 9 different reasons why they could be down. And Charger Hub at this point, we've had about 20,000 different touch points with charging stations, and that is aggregation of a lot of data. And we want to get to the point where the data becomes predictive, where a technician will know just based on that charging station, that manufacturer, is it a level 2 or is it a level 3? And based on the data that we've aggregated, we have now made some very viable conclusions about why it is inoperable. So that when a technician gets there, we can now mitigate the time that they're there. We can now get to 97% uptime that much faster. And now that technician can now move on to another charging station. So the data, really understanding how charging stations behave, really understanding the source of their inoperability and really being ready to solve for it. Is it a hardware issue? Is it a software issue? Is it the network operating provider? Is it a bandwidth issue? Knowing that and getting to that answer quickly will definitely get us to the uptime that we're looking for.
Maybe let me just build on this stream a little bit with a question from Sal Tannenbaum. He was asking about the sort of the impact of the right to repair movement, which is, you know, this concept that increasingly automotive OEMs are saying only our technicians can work on our vehicles with our specialized equipment and so forth. And, you know, here in Massachusetts, we had a vote on this actually, sort of, do we want to open it up to repair from independent mechanics and so forth? But it gets to this heart of, you know, you use the word agnostic, and it sort of gets to this heart of like, the question is, do we want a really truly agnostic platform? And how do we get there? How do we allow these different groups to repair you know, various components of this electrification system? This is a really big high level question again, and I'm turning to all 3 of the panelists for thoughts on this. Maybe first to you, Kiana.
Sure. One of the things that we've seen, when I use the term agnostic, I am thinking about just our own experiences with having our techs trained for on different OEMs, EVSE. And we've had experiences where a technician has gone to a charging station and they are unable or prohibited from performing O&M because they don't have the latest training. And sometimes they don't find that out till they get there. We are really we really keep a pulse on trainings through these OEMs. Like, we contact them, we say, hey, is there any new training? Is there any new training? So for me, it's and then there's also, when we talk about the training, there's different ways that it happens. There are some OEMs that will only train a certain number of techs a year. There are certain OEMs that will only train up to 5 at a time. There are some that will allow us to be trained the trainer. There are some that the price is astronomical, and there are some that it is a price that is accessible. So the different variations and the different ways that people can and have to get trained can produce a barrier and a hindrance of folks being able to provide operation and maintenance for different charging stations. So I think if we really want to push towards climate correction, right? I know we're talking about business, we're talking about capitalism in a sense. We're not talking about it, but it's present. We want, you know, companies have to produce revenue. So I get it, but we're really pushing towards climate correction. We're really pushing towards reducing these emissions. Then I think that we would need to do a better job of just linking arms in that conversation and seeing how we're not being a bottleneck, a hindrance, an obstacle to just the overarching goal. And if there's a way to us to remove some of those bottlenecks or those barriers, if there's a way to kind of smooth out operations and allow for more openness and access, then let's at least talk about it. But right now, it looks different here, it looks different there. There's a time allotment here, there's a shortage there. So for me, the agnosticism is moving towards a space where it's just a bit more open, it's a bit more accessible. There's an entryway for us to literally just do our jobs. I mean, just fix the charging stations.
And Rajiv, have you seen this this sort of conflict between open platforms and walled gardens, if you will, proprietary systems in your work in India?
Yeah, John, I think that's how things begin, right? Everyone wants to have their pie. That's why we have GB by T, we have CCS, we have CHEDEMO, and then we have Tesla superchargers. But then the players come to an understanding at this point of time that things cannot be built in silos, especially when we are looking at a grand scale and a grand revolution unveiling. There is more scope for collaboration than competition. And now you see Tesla opening up its platform and opening up its protocols to General Motors, to Ford, etc. I think going forward, what I see is that proprietary or the close to heart mindset is going to slowly, I would say, fade away. More collaborative approach is going to come. Even that's the case even in India, right? When the manufacturing in India began, every two-wheeler manufacturer wanted to have their own battery, their own protocol, their own charging guns, right? But now a lot of universal, I would say, chargers and universal adoption is coming into picture because number one, the chemical, I would say the chemical ingredients remain the same. When we talk about lithium cobalt dioxide or lithium ferrous phosphate, they remain the same. When you talk about the powertrain and then the traction motors, they remain the same. And when we talk about the firm base, they remain the same. And if the only differentiation some wants to bring is by building better algorithm or better other kind of things, it is as good as kept open so that nobody needs to invent the wheel, but then they can build on the innovation that is already developed. I think the whole world is converging in that direction, more collaborative approach, more shared platforms. I would say erasing those boundaries, removing those silos, which is good. And that's exactly what's happening in India too. Thank you very much, John. And that's what is good for the health of the industry too.
Sunil, in the last 30 seconds, anything to add? And just a quick question that was thrown in from Webfair about what about electric trolley buses at the MTA, meaning non-battery solutions for electrification at the MTA? Any last closing comments?
Yeah, so last closing comments on non-electric buses. What we are doing right now is, I don't know if trolley buses are a effective strategy to move forward in the zero emissions arena, but we are actively looking at the hydrogen fuel cell bus space, and we feel that given the increased costs when it comes to installing charging infrastructure at our depots, buying these buses, integrating these buses, the deployment of hydrogen fuel cell buses, and following a similar strategy as what we followed for CNG buses essentially makes a strong case for alternative propulsion types in the zero emission space. So it is my sincere belief and the MTA's sincere belief that hydrogen has a fairly large role to play in New York City. Of course, standards and protocols and certifications have to be developed by the local fire departments, but mark my words that hydrogen is going to come to New York very soon. So that's how I would answer that particular question. Yeah, John.
Thank you.
I know I had 30 seconds. I went over, but
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to the panel. Before I conclude, I have to mention two things. One is the gender perspective. In the traditional mobility sector, clearly skewed towards male. Would the electrification change the balance towards a more balanced gender perspective? That's one thing. The second one is when we say retraining, we typically mean employees. But here I want to argue that every single one of us as customer of the system also need to be retrained. We're often the owner of the vehicle. We're often the operator of the vehicle. We also have a role to play towards the transition to the electric or decarbonized mobility system. So without further ado, please join me thank the panel, Kiana, Rajiv, and Sunil for the presentation and the conversation with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Right. Yeah. Right. So next Friday, we'll have a session on fiscal cliff of public transit by Jeremy Fine from CTA Chief Financial Officer, and Jim Aloisi and Fred Sauci from MIT. See you guys next Friday. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.